In the late 1970s, a hole in the ozone layer was discovered over Antarctica and was seemingly caused by man-made pollution and chemicals. The ozone layer, a vital part of the Earth's atmosphere which helps maintain life on Earth, was depleting. Per the UN Environmental Program in 1985, governments adopted the Vienna Convention for the protection of the ozone layer, which provided the framework for the Montreal Protocol to phase out ozone-depleting substances, including chlorofluorocarbons. This was the beginning of the worldwide initiative to save the ozone layer and subsequently save humanity. Countries came together to do something for the collective on the largest scale possible, and it was truly amazing. In 2024, we had one of the hottest summers to date, floods which destroyed the East Coast, fires which destroyed California, and continuous drought to the West, all while insurance companies refused to pay for the damages endured by their paying customers, and Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, refused to call Congress back into session to authorize more FEMA aid to those affected by the floods. So what's the deal with that? So, needless to say, climate change has us. The West Coast is currently burning up and the East Coast is being waterboarded, and at the same time, we are drying out and just in general heating up. This takes me to cities and the basis of my research. Lately, we've seen a lot of political and social unrest, economic uncertainty, and just a lot of other issues that can be mainly drawn up to economic inequality, the wealth gap, exploitation of labor, and resource management. And let me break it down. So after the formation of our cities and the localization of labor in these cities, we've seen a lot of things like rapid industrialization take root. In Chicago, the setting of my research, we have a lot of labor movements associated with the beginnings of mass production, which would eventually accelerate things like climate change and mass emissions from factories, coal usage, and use of inventions like cars becoming much more commonplace. Now, at least here in America, we live in a post-industrial economy where jobs like manufacturing are much less common because they've been outsourced to other much poorer countries where labor is typically cheaper. Now, we mainly do service jobs here in the US, think McDonald's and Home Depot, or if you're more educated and you're lucky, you could get to depart and move up to the professional managerial class, or better yet, become a small business owner yourself. The issue is that many aren't able to do that. Merits like higher education and college degrees just can't compare to those born into generational wealth. This is the essential fault of capitalism. It uses workers as resources up until there isn't anything left. The primary counteractive force to capitalism was once labor unions, which unfortunately they just don't fill the shoes which they're meant to. So many of us tend to believe that here in the United States we are living freer than in any other nation. Cleverly, we have been convinced that the conditions we live under are totally normal. Phrases like the second world and the third world are common refrains in American life today, but their use obscures the real motives and, more importantly, the real solutions to poverty, and are often used to alienate countries exploited by colonialism as otherworldly. But poverty is not something that we have the privilege of hiding from, nor should we try to hide from it. To categorize the Earth into first, second, and third world countries, it's totally useless. A much more accurate term would actually be the Global South, which reflects the idea that poverty and poor material conditions can and do exist everywhere, especially here in the United States. If the problem is treating humans like resources, the problem statement itself also describes the solution itself. Treating humans as humans, equipped with basic freedoms and a natural desire to care for each other. Simply put, we could not be here today with the technology we have created if it weren't for those that came before us and those who we live alongside right now. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and we stand side by side with them. Interreliance is natural and consistent. It's a basic feature of social landscapes otherwise defined by fear and crisis. This phenomenon is called mutual aid, a principle described by generations of anthropologists and biologists, which was spotlighted most notably by Russian researcher Peter Kropotkin. While the term has been given a uniquely political meaning in recent years, its biggest proponents insist that it's still just a natural part of life. The case they make is compelling, and proof of it is really everywhere. You're about to see a mountain of evidence showing the necessity of these practices. But while mutual aid is not necessarily political, it does stand distinct from the traditional American practice of confident individualism.
I think one thing that mutual aid organizations can do right now is to communicate that there is hope in Chicago, that it's worth investing in Chicago, that our climate future is challenging, but that this is a place where it's worth digging in. And then when we're in that spirit of hope, we can build resilience. We can work to invest in a local food system so that we can keep feeding people. The neighborhood gardens and neighborhood farms that have been built out in Detroit are so inspiring. When we look to what urban resilience can look like for working class people, Detroit is a great role model. The revitalization that's happening there is so inspiring. And there's no reason, if we don't get the land now, why we can't do it on the South Side. I think that beyond a local food system, in Chicago, we're really strong because water is going to be okay. It's important to have short term water storage available in case there's problems with the utilities. But overall, our water resources, we're going to be able to adapt no matter what. Knowing who our neighbors are and being able to help them in the event of severe weather events or power outages, which are going to continue to be our round the clock Four Seasons challenge in Chicago, is another important way that we can be strong together.
The COVID-19 pandemic made the necessity of mutual aid obvious beyond any doubt. In the cities hit the hardest, neighbors who might not have had so much as a conversation before 2020 discovered that all they had left was each other. Our attention was drawn to Chicago, where impressively well-coordinated networks provided grocery deliveries to their neighbors in quarantine, rent assistance to the vulnerable, gardening initiatives, and so much more. At the peak of the pandemic, there was no time to stop and think about whether the state couldn't keep people afloat or simply didn't want to. But the survival of these networks 5 years on and their massive involvement in the fight against the climate crisis points the finger at government negligence more than anything. Crises tend to repeat themselves, and while the climate crisis has felt overwhelming at times, we have plenty to learn from. Class differences reveal themselves quickly in really any crisis. When the pandemic came, just like the fires, the floods, and the recessions, the wealthy simply left the world behind and just focused on themselves. Things didn't change much for them. Think about how many wealthy celebrities partied during the COVID-19 pandemic. Those who had never had to rely on their neighbors for support have the financial means to remove themselves from society altogether. Their access to resources dictates how they interact with society, and a life dictated by capital access has clearly created massive social rifts. We return now to the concept of the third world and the impossibility of classifying communities in that way accurately. Think of a Black community with a highway built through it to keep people apart. Think of policies withholding adequate public transit to certain neighborhoods. Think of the tax structures keeping schools in poverty-stricken neighborhoods poor by relying on property tax rather than state or federal funding. These and many more are all strategies to create these conditions really anywhere. And if misery and poverty can be cultivated, freedom and community need to be cultivated as well.
So the major challenge on the community level was having that accessibility to the soil testing and understanding more about soil health in general. Because of the urban infrastructure, there's a detachment and disconnect between people and land in many instances and situations. And so our organization is community-based and faces challenges of lack of funding, lack of education around soil and soil health in general. I would say the lack of information and lack of resources from the state or government level, and even in the environmental world, those resources are in need and are lacking. And so that's why our collective took the initiative to create that resource around soil health and soil testing.
Because of its central role in regional, national, and international affairs, Chicago has long been ground zero in the battle to shape the future of our world. Here we see the conflicts between workers and bosses, tenants and landlords, industry and environment, and of course, the people in the state. And it all unfolds at a scale few other places have seen. The city's network of mutual aid groups didn't just pop up out of nowhere. The city of Chicago has had a long history of reliance on this type of organization. To understand Chicago of the present, we need to take a detour through its illustrious history. Here we see a map of some of the city's most prominent mutual aid groups, where they operated and the demonstrations that coincided with them. Perhaps the best place for us to start is at Haymarket Square. The early history of organizing in Chicago is perhaps best epitomized by the iconic Haymarket Affair, which remains a decisive moment in Chicago and global labor history to this day. On May 1st, 1881, thousands of workers went on strike, demanding an 8-hour workday. 3 days later, on May 4th, 2,500 Chicago laborers gathered at Haymarket Square, where they were confronted by the police. The violent confrontation ended with death and injury on both sides, caused by a bomb thrown by a still unknown assailant. The 1881 strikes didn't result in the acceptance for all the strikers' demands, but it did become a symbol for the labor movement and organizers of all stripes. For that reason, May 1st is now celebrated as International Workers' Day or Labor Day. The movement these workers helped build would go on to deliver crucial wins for the working class, including the eventual adoption of the 8-hour workday. This iconic event helped set the tone for Chicago's organizing community, and in its wake, organizers in the early 20th century worked hard to lay the groundwork for the vibrant atmosphere of activism and service that would reach the fullest potential in the years ahead. Typical of this period were community service organizations formed along the lines of shared need, culture, and identity. One of the oldest of these organizations still around today is the Japanese Mutual Aid Society. Founded in 1935, the organization provided social services to the local Japanese community, especially those concerning funeral rites. Many of the immigrants who founded the Japanese Mutual Aid Society worked blue-collar jobs for little to no pay and found themselves isolated from their support systems back home. Often they died alone and without the means for proper burial. This was a tragic end for the people who faced such hardships to make a better life for their families in the first place. This is why they focused on a funeral service assistance. Today, this is the main function of the organization, and they remain a part of the Japanese community in Chicago. As the Great Depression ravaged working class and marginalized communities, the city's organizers worked to mitigate the harm. In 1939, Saul Alinsky, one of the fathers of community organization, founded the Back of the Yards Neighborhood Council, a community organization that advocated for the social and economic betterment of their neighborhood. The group identified community needs and then brought neighborhood leadership and residents together to find a way to meet those needs. As his life and career went on, he continued this work with great success, forming the blueprint for community organizing along the way. Some of the organizations he formed, like the Industrial Areas Foundation and the Woodlawn Organization, continue to be fixtures in the Chicago landscape to this day. Before his death, Alinsky published a guide to organizing called Rules for Radicals, which instilled the knowledge that he had accrued over the years. Ultimately, Alinsky's ideas of radical change did not go far enough in addressing the root problems of white supremacy, structural violence, and labor exploitation. This and the intense systematic discrimination against Black people would lead to the escalation of the civil rights movement in the 1960s under the leadership of more radical individuals inspired by the likes of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and the Black Panthers. Intimately connected to this was the environmental crisis of the 1960s, which kicked off the modern-day environmental movements in the United States. Chicago was not immune to the crisis or the response to it, and the mother of environmental activism, Hazel Johnson, a Black woman, discovered that her neighborhood in Chicago's South Side was experiencing negative health outcomes due to the effects of industrialization. In response to this, Johnson founded the People for Community Recovery and began her long career of advocating for environmental, social, and economic justice. PCR fights to address the toxic industrial pollution that has been killing members of their communities for decades on end. They take an all-encompassing approach to community health that unifies efforts for safe and affordable housing, with efforts to address the climate crisis and environmental destruction. While many of the elements that defined organizing in the past have changed, Chicago has maintained a vibrant culture in its wake. Hopefully, the organizers of today can live up to the legacies of those who came before. Former President Barack Obama was one of the people to carry on this legacy. In the 1980s, before attending Harvard Law, he was the executive director of the Developing Communities Project in the Roseland neighborhood of Chicago, where he worked diligently to get asbestos removed from an apartment complex in Alt-Geld. He was inspired heavily by Alinsky's organizing principles and even worked directly with Hazel Johnson on the asbestos project. But unfortunately, he would go on to betray their legacy and his own in his political career. Today, organizers are working to resist the development of the Obama Presidential Center in the South Shore neighborhood of Chicago. This project will contribute to the displacement of Black residents from their homes that has been occurring across the country through gentrification. Ironically, the people resisting this project carry on Obama's legacy better than he did himself in his later life.
Well, I was born in 1963. You know, the whole country was on edge, and even more so before I was born. But I just remember things during the 70s. I remember the Black Panthers marching through my neighborhood. I didn't know that as a child. I didn't realize the significance of that till later on, but it's always been etched in my mind. So that's always been important to me. And even growing up, I always remember advocating for one thing or another. This is just since high school. I remember Nestle, for instance, they were pushing these baby formulas, some of the less developed countries, and people didn't have sanitary water. So in essence, the formula was killing the infants or causing disease because these people didn't have access to potable water.
But the real question is, what really works? Who made real strides and change in their communities? The Black Panthers are a perfect example of this change. Under the elected leadership of Chairman Fred Hampton, they started the Free Breakfast Program, which gained national attention, especially the government's. Recognizing the program's success, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover famously wrote in the 1969 memo sent to all field offices that the Breakfast for Children program represents the best and most influential activity going for the Black Panther Party, and as such is potentially the greatest threat to efforts by authorities to neutralize the Black Panther Party and destroy what it stands for. Thanks again to Dean Spade for framing this in their book, Mutual Aid. But why were the Black Panthers villains in the eyes of the FBI? They cut through the red tape and got to the root of class division in the U.S. Instead of waging a culture war, they correctly identified the issues at hand, a class struggle. Instead of fighting with poor white communities and other organizations across the city, they sought to form an alliance and actually challenge the power of the state by directly calling out systemic oppression of poor people. More generally, they were becoming much more successful at rallying people of all backgrounds. This is arguably in direct opposition of state interests. They called the oligarchs for what they are, and used the act of mutual aid to bring people together. This is how true change was made for people. Mutual aid is not inherently radical. It was branded as radical because it undermines the principles of the free market. While the Black Panthers were responding to different circumstances than we are today, the strategies they used can still be applied to the present situation. The market failed to meet the needs of their communities, the same way it's failing to meet the needs of those most affected by climate change. Today's organizers are using mutual aid practices to combat this failure the same way the Black Panthers were before them. And while race is still a highly contentious issue in the United States, which today's organizers are still battling, climate change is another which is permanently connected to these socioeconomic issues like race. And much like COVID-19, it's revealing just how much we really do need each other.
So my name is Dr. Emily Scherning. I'm the founder and CEO of American Resiliency, a 501c3 that focuses on getting climate information to all of America's communities. We make publicly accessible federal climate information that belongs to all of us, but there is no federal funding for communicating this information. So this nonprofit is trying to fill the gap.
So what is the general climate change outlook for Chicago? What are we going to be seeing?
You know, this is one of the reasons, Felicity, that I think it's so important that we understand our local climate projections from sources like the National Climate Assessment, because Chicago's climate outlook is pretty decent. It's definitely within adaptation range. And because the city of Chicago has been taking action since 2008, I really think that we're ready to hit this first hurdle running. I heard you talk about struggles, and I'm going to interpret this to like, what are the challenges in the Chicago outlook? Because there are, there's change coming everywhere. There's no place where we don't expect to see challenges emerge. In Chicago, I think that one of the concerns that we should have is flooding on all of the rivers. And we know, I grew up in the Chicago area. The Des Plaines, the Fox, they already love to flood, right? We expect really serious deluge type rain to emerge not in Chicago, but upstream. So what I'm showing you here is one of the figures from the 5th National Climate Assessment, publicly available data and figures that help us understand our climate outlook. This is figure 212, looks pretty crazy, right? It's hard to interpret at first glance. But what we should look for to see where we expect to see really serious deluge type rain is repeating patterns. And look, up north of Chicago in Wisconsin, we see a really big one. There's this line of intense storms dropping huge amounts of rain projected to form along the Iowa-Minnesota border and going into Wisconsin. Projecting against deluge is going to be really important for people getting ready in Madison. In Chicago, you can see that we're not really facing as serious a threat. I mean, the rains will be more intense, but not so far above the national average. What I would be really concerned about is anyone who's in the watershed downstream of these big rains north of us. The climate action plan of the city of Chicago, which a lot of Chicago's climate actions have been focused on trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improving infrastructure. There's always more to do. There's never enough funding for climate, but the city of Chicago has been putting big bucks into adaptation work since 2008. That's sooner than almost any other major American city. When we look at all of the road work that's being done around Chicago, it's not just to increase capacity for traffic. It's because there's a need to prevent our major roads from flooding. Chicago has also done a lot to beef up the grid locally. We have one of the strongest grids in our region of the Midwest because power availability and power reliability is very important for Chicago's climate outlook. We do expect to see increased power needs for air conditioning in the summer. There's like a really clear north side, south side divide. So here we're in another figure from the NCA 5, figure 2.11. And I want to zoom in on hot days, on our change in number of days at or over 95 projected at 2C. It's worth saying that right now we've been at or above 1.5C for like a year and 2 months. So 2C is not as far away as we used to think. We used to peg 2C at 2050, but things got weird in 2023. Anyway, focusing on Chicago. You can see that there's this clear line dividing Chicagoland, where if you're south of this line, you're going to expect closer to 2 additional weeks in the daytime hot season. If you're north of it, more like 1 week. So there's always been differences and inequalities between Chicago's north side and south side. And like we often see with climate doesn't fall in a just way when we look at these changes. We see again these inequalities. I'm zooming back out here because I want to talk about the nighttime change too in the summer, because you all know what a difference it makes if it cools off at night, right? Like if you can turn the air conditioning off and open up the place, let the cool night air come in. We see bigger changes with the nighttime warming here, where you can see you have to get pretty far north, like basically out of Chicagoland, to get more preservation of nighttime cool. This dark here, down kind of by downtown, that's almost a month. That's 25 additional days projected where it's not going to cool off at night in the summer. So people are going to want air conditioning around the clock. And as you get further out, you're talking still close to 3 weeks, like 20 days additional in the summer where it's not going to cool off well. It's not going to get below 70. So there are a lot of American cities that have much worse climate outlooks than this, but this is an appreciable level of increased electrical demand that we should be expecting related to increased summer heat.
What Dr. S is saying isn't some crazy new information. We've had it for a while, and many in positions of power know that climate change is a huge problem. The planet is heating up a lot faster than we initially thought. Original estimations saying that we wouldn't be at 1.5C until 2050 are now saying that we are already there and are on pace to hit 2C very soon.
So when we talk about 1.5C, I think that there are people in the climate aware community who may link that number with the Paris Accords, that we were trying to keep global warming below 1.5C over pre-industrial baseline. And we had a big jump. We had an abrupt jump from being at about 1C over pre-industrial baseline to about 1.5C from 2023 to 2024. When we're talking about moving to 2C, half a degree might not sound like a big deal, but in terms of changes to Earth systems, they're very significant. Most of us have noticed that the last 2 falls have been weird. These have been very warm Octobers, like 80 degrees for most of October. Not normal, right, for people in Chicago? But now it's happened 2 years in a row. And it's because that's what the change is from 1C to 1.5C. The change from 1.5 to 2, it's going to be just as big. We'll really feel it on the ground. It used to be that we thought 2C was likely to arrive around 2050, giving plenty of time to make some more upgrades to try and maintain as much quality of life and agricultural stability as we could. But it really looks like, the timeline we used to rely on seems like it might not play out. It seems like we need to get ready for 2C now. We don't know how quickly it will come, but I would rather be ready if I could. So I pulled up this map of Chicago neighborhoods that hopefully is going to be relatively up to date. It looks to me like Hyde Park probably falls above the line, and Bronzeville probably falls above the line. Although, we expect a gradient, right? And we're not talking about a super huge difference. We're talking about a 5-day difference in the hot season extension from north to south. It looks like the change threshold is going to be around South Shore and then heading west from there. So all of your neighborhoods south of here, of course, we're talking about some areas where there's a real need for mutual aid and community organizing to meet any incoming threat. I think that in the summer, you're going to want to think about community cooling centers as an important part of our local response to climate change and our protection of our neighbors. In the winter, we expect bigger winter change to the Chicago area than summer change, with winter lows moving above 0. Now that's 0F, so it's still a cold winter, but that is a lot milder than we used to see. We expect to lose almost all of our days below 0. And I think that many people who aren't familiar with Chicago would be like, oh, this sounds nice. It sounds like the winter's going to improve. I think as a person from Chicago, this makes me think ice storms. With us having more precipitation, with us having a milder winter, with us having a broader shoulder season where we're moving in and out of freezing conditions, I would worry about ice. And so if you're in a neighborhood where you know that you got to help your neighbors, making sure that you have salt and you have a plan to check on elderly people who could be really hurt by a slip and fall on ice is an important way to build resilience. It's also important, we know ice storms can take out the grid, right? If you have a plan where you're going to get a generator or some other backup power situation, you got to make sure that you're setting it up safe, where there's no generators inside a house or another closed building, and that you know how to operate it before an emergency. That's the sort of thing I would rather not figure out while I was scared, while my hands were shaking. And our neighborhoods that haven't yet gentrified are precious. Those are where working class Chicagoans need to dig deep. Working to get invested in our city, to find ways to buy in together if we can, is so important, because if you look at the New York outlook, if you look at the LA outlook, one is going to be on fire and the other is going to be underwater. People are going to want to be in Chicago, and it is going to drive the prices up like nuts. We're in a good window for people to get what they can, because Chicago has always been a working class town, and we need to hold our ground.
The effects of climate change on those living paycheck to paycheck or who simply don't have financial stability will be much worse. The working class and those in poverty have always had to bear the brunt of global catastrophes, from hurricanes to economic collapse. In the case of the climate crisis, it's really no different. I sent out a survey to a bunch of different Chicago mutual aid groups, and one of the questions was, how would you define climate change? And here's what they said. A systemic issue that results in water shortages, heat waves, and other climate events that endanger the most vulnerable around us. It also hurts the plants and animals. The irreversible damage done to the planet due to corporate extraction of resources done with the interest of capital and profit over people and planet. Global weirding, i.e., unpredictable weather events and extremes in every climactic direction. Climate change is the phenomenon caused by man-made actions which the global weather patterns are influenced by a change in the ozone. These changes impact the strength of storms, the expected climate of a region, including hotter summers in Chicago, shorter falls, and colder winters, the amount of rainfall or periods of drought, etc. So needless to say, we got a lot of very interesting answers. Transparently, only 13 people filled out the survey, and even less actually answered that question. So the sample size was not as big as I would have liked. But the important message here is mutual aid groups and their affiliates are on a similar page about the effects of climate change and who exactly is responsible, even if it's just a few people. So the next question, simply put, is where exactly do these groups fit in the conversation about climate change?
My name is Wes Cheek. I am a professor of emergency management at Massachusetts Maritime Academy. For social media handles, I'm Wes in Japan on Blue Sky. I used to be notorious at that handle on Twitter, but I'm a nicer person on Blue Sky. And I'm not in Japan anymore, so my handle makes no sense anymore. But yeah.
Disaster relief is one of those things that you don't really think about until it's too late. This is especially true if you live in an area where natural disasters are totally out of the ordinary. As we saw with the floods on the East Coast just last year, the amount of damage caused can be huge. Floodplains are changing, and places which may not have been prone to flooding in the past could now be at risk. Similarly, in California, hundreds of thousands were displaced due to the wildfires, with reports of insurance companies refusing to cover the damages. Events like these will be more common whether we're ready for them or not.
What example can you share with us of a successful disaster response strategy being implemented in communities lacking the resources to respond in more comprehensive ways?
One that is a really big concern, right, is that we run into, and it's not that no one in the global South can do infrastructure projects. They can, right? There are decent hard infrastructure projects in the global South. It's really difficult. It's a lot of investment, and you can get yourself in trouble because the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank will say we will fund these hard infrastructure projects, and then you will go in debt to them and have to do neoliberal policies to kind of to re-up on that. That being said, Cuba's doctors that they send to emergency areas across the world are renowned, right? They're very good at it. They're very good at emergency management in general, and are now, don't know if you've been following the news, but have not been criminalized. That if you work with Cuban overseas emergency management, I haven't looked at all of the all of the language, but I think there was a Trump executive order saying that there'll be criminal penalties for working with them, right? So I think Cuba's teams of doctors they send out to disaster areas are one that you can name. Turkey, and I don't know where Turkey falls into the global South. It's kind of an interesting spot where it has an kind of authoritarian state, but a developing economy. They have excellent search and rescue teams. They put a lot of priority on cultural heritage and architectural heritage in their rescue teams. So that's good. They have the kind of knowledge of how to do historical buildings, how to get into historical buildings to do search and rescue. They bring along heritage architects, preservation architects with their search and rescue teams, which is pretty great. There are projects throughout the Philippines, just working at a local community level on the ground kind of disaster mitigation and disaster recovery. And I think throughout the global South, because it's not always as easy to just throw money at a problem, that you see a lot of these issues just being kind of worked through on a local level with what we call soft measures. But you can think about hard project as anything that is like civil engineering, right? Like levees, dams, bridges, rebuilding housing a lot of times, right? Roads. Just the kind of what you would picture as the big investment civil engineering projects. Soft would be things like capacity building, anything that's kind of just bringing people together to kind of talk through issues. You'll see oftentimes they'll have makeshift cafes or spaces where people can gather and do arts and crafts, things that don't involve large scale investment in civil engineering projects. So I would say a general rule, the way to think about it is it involves large scale investment in kind of a civil engineering project. You can think about it as hard measures. If it involves more what we call capacity building and people kind of doing the work, then that would be soft.
The effects of climate change have created the need for more comprehensive community support among the working class in our cities. Where the state and the market have failed, working class institutions have emerged, attempting to meet people's needs and furthering the struggle for dignified and fulfilling lives. Urban farmers and mutual aid groups are two of the main networks at the forefront of the climate crisis in cities.
My name is Valentine Espinosa. I go by she, her. My organization is Chicago Safe Soils Collective. Our organization addresses the need for soil testing on a communal level. The need for soil testing addresses environmental factors of soil contamination and soil nutrients. So restoring some of that organic matter and carbon in soils through soil education and soil monitoring.
My name is Stefan Hamer. Pronouns he, him, they, them, all pronouns with respect. And I am a farm steward with Grow Greater Englewood. I'm also a land steward at my family farm on the south side of Chicago.
Our major community impact through Chicago Safe Soils would be addressing the direct need for those who, one, reach out to us. We're offering our collective resources and workshops to communities like Little Village, Pilsen, Humboldt Park, the southeast side, back of the yards, anywhere within the urban city limits that, one, reach out to us because of the need for soil testing. We understand that lead and other environmental factors play a huge role throughout the city. It's not something new, but we understand that our community members are actively growing and interacting with soils, and so creating that resource for them is super important. So I feel like since I started doing this communal work, word of mouth has played a major role in how we've, one, influenced our direct communities, and as well as the greater Chicagoland area and the food shed. There are tons of growers, backyard growers, urban farmers who interact with soils and understand the need of soil health. And so because we are one of a few hand of people who offer this service, I feel like that's the role we play because we're community level, we're approachable, and we're also growers. I don't know if you've ever tried to get your soil tested, but most of the times you have to go to a lab. And so even researching something like that, and then what lab, how much does it cost? It's a huge process. It's not something that's readily accessible. And taking into consideration that most people have families and other things to take care of that take up most of their time and attention. So being able to be present within community and offering the service, I feel like is a huge benefit to all of us. And it also allows the resource to be present and available to them. So one, that it's there, it exists, and they know about it. And if it's there, they're able to utilize it.
How do you guys view climate change and its effects?
Well, for me, I see it's drastically affecting the way we grow, because Illinois, and well, especially where we're at in Illinois, 2018, we were in zone 5. Up to now, only 7 years later, we're in zone 6A. Now, zone 5, it's a colder grow zone. Now we're in zone 6. Which we found out that last year or so, or before that. So that's just showing how much we've warmed up. And sometimes we say, well, you can plant lettuce at this time, or brassicas, which is your kale, collards, things like that during this time. But basically, you have to shift that mindset because it's getting warmer. And one way you can tell about that is because some things you plant and they begin to bolt or flower or go to seed. And that's happening earlier and sooner. And plus the pests, it affects the pests too, because the pests fester. And I've seen bigger pest problems this year than I've seen in earlier years. So you're constantly battling pests. You're constantly thinking about, well, how many months do I have before I have to pull this crop or pull that crop, because the temperature is changing so much. I mean, even if you think about now, we're in the Midwest, and when have we had the last heavy snow here? Those are things you really have to think about. And what are we prepared for? And I think one thing too, you'll probably see more people growing indoors or having facilities like bigger hoop houses or greenhouses where they can just simply grow indoors all year round, because it's so unpredictable out there. So it's definitely having an effect on us.
Really being in community, for me, I think is the answer to fighting back with like climate change. And I know that there's a lot more to that. And the answer has always been to build coalition, talk to your neighbors, see who is next door, who's down the street, who has something that you may need at some point. There's always been a need for food. We need that as a basic need. So produce your own food, grow your own food, and whatever capacity that you have. Folks start with, just maybe their back porch or like a small plot of land in their backyard, and you'll be surprised. You're able to grow a lot of food in a very small space.
Val, Stefan, and Mel are just 3 of the many urban farmers who are currently working to create more sustainability in Chicago, each specializing in something a bit different from the other, but still working in the same field.
My family farm site is more like an orchard. My grandmother has planted grapes. We have a pear tree, a black walnut tree, apple tree. Through like volunteer, we have folks come out to the land to volunteer. Residents themselves engage with their backyard gardens. Typically with the program, we have roughly like 5 to 6 site visits per year. We're counting and looking for the residents to take some initiative and to growing up their own food as well. I host like harvest parties, which is a way for me to like engage people with the produce and with the trees, but then also they come have a good time. You're able to harvest the pears, harvest grapes, and you leave with, a nice like bag of produce afterwards. So
when it comes to climate change, I feel like as a person, I understand how soil in its cycle with carbon, how it holds water retention. All these things are interdependent factors that play a role in our natural cycles, whether it's the water cycle, the land, our air, they're all interconnected cycles. And so our small approach in trying to understand what soil is, how it's formed, how it retains organic matter, and the role it plays as a reservoir for carbon is one of the ways in which we address that small level of creating education and workshops and soil testing.
Growing on my own for years, my grandma always had a garden. She had these strawberry patches and flowers. She grew flowers or whatever. My grandpa, my maternal grandpa, was a fisherman. So they would go fishing, and you'd come home sometimes, it'd be a fish in the tub. So I've always liked growing whatever I could grow. When we first got access to the allotment garden, I had a couple of beds over there, and I grew some melons and other foods. A lot of it I gave away. When the City Harvest Farm was starting to be built, I would go back there and volunteer with a couple of the farmers, and that's how I got connected to the Winter City Harvest Urban Agriculture Program apprenticeship. And because I needed to learn the basics of having a farm business, different food groups, say your brassicas, things like that. Because if I wanted to educate the community about the benefits of growing your own food and just in general, I needed to know as much as I can about the anatomy of food as well. And just wanted to bring my formal chef training full circle. So that was important to me, to learn about the things I grow. I always felt like it was important, that this was a skill set that you needed to have. And even if it wasn't going to come in handy then, one day it was going to come in handy. My dad always said, if you know how to do something with your hands, you could always make it. So that was important to me, knowing how to do things with my hand. And specifically getting your hands in the soil is just a different experience. It's so enriching, just knowing that you're taking care of the soil, because we didn't make the soil. The soil was already here, and it's up to us to take care of it.
The larger theme here is this idea of a network. In addition to our urban farmers, there are other networks doing very similar work and using informal methods of communication to coordinate their community's needs based off of grassroots organizing. Many of these groups are connected with churches and other physical networks, which then allow them to operate on a much larger scale as well.
My name is Penny Gibbons. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder of Trash People. Trash People is an organization that exists to make it easier for people to connect with and contribute to their community. We have 3 projects. We run hyperlocal neighborhood cleanups. We host a big volunteer fair where we provide other opportunities for people to volunteer and get involved in the community around the city. And we also run the Parlor. And the Parlor is a resource redistribution project that aims to make it easier for people to share their items with others in the city, whilst also reducing harm to the planet. We're also aiming to address a number of issues, mostly around overconsumption and excess in one area and not enough needs of the community in other areas. Trash People was actually created to help people find connections with other people in the community that shared their values. It started because I was incredibly lonely post-pandemic and wanted to meet people that shared my values of caring for other people and the environment. And I figured the kind of person I wanted to meet would be willing to pick up trash from strangers on a Saturday morning. Through that work, I learned that there were so many people that wanted to get involved and do something, but just didn't know how. And we were finding that our very accessible community cleanups were a really easy way for people to get involved. And that led to us creating the Volunteer Fair because we wanted to share our network of engaged Chicagoans with other nonprofits and mutual aid groups that need volunteers and are looking for people to get involved. So we're trying to build an efficient system of resource redistribution and sharing that allows those needs to be filled across the city and also benefits the environment.
Penny's operation utilizes a bottom-up strategy to look at community need and meets the needs in a variety of ways like distribution and community cleanup. The Parlor is a great example of this.
Okay, cool. So we're in the Parlor. How we work here is community members bring us their unwanted and surplus items. We accept those items, make sure that they're on our list of things that we know that we can redistribute. We sort them into like items, and then we work to package them up into the orders that our partners want. So we have things like pillows, we take bedding, duvets. We work to make sure that we're trying to build bundles of bedding to make sure that we're being useful in what we're giving people. We get so much clothing. This is just a small amount of what we've received since we've been doing this work. So everything gets sorted and filtered into the appropriate boxes, and our volunteers make sure the items are in good condition, they're washed, there's no holes, that they're appropriate to be redistributed to the community. We do accept some things here that might not be on everyone's list of items that are obviously reusable. So for example, we take reusable bags. These are actually often very useful to food pantries to distribute food in. We take orange pill bottles. We give those to pet shelters to distribute pet medication in. We even take items like the clear plastic bags that you get around dry cleaning. Those actually go to a small local pottery studio because that plastic wrap is really useful in the pottery making process. So whilst 99.9% of the items that come through our doors go out again through other nonprofits and mutual aid groups to provide resources to vulnerable and underserved communities here in Chicago, we do accept items that are really more on an environmental basis and are distributed to any community members or small businesses as well. So these are some of the small items that we accept, and you'll see some of these boxes are extremely, extremely small. We have a very, very small space here. This is a very scrappy project, and ultimately we try and operate in kind of just-in-time sort of process that as soon as we have enough of something, we try to figure out where it can go out to. We don't have the kind of space where we can be storing items for a really long period of time. So we have the room for it where there's just enough to be useful to somebody, and then it goes out the door to the first person that can use it. So we actually collect egg cartons. So one of the things that we really like to collect is the stuff that would otherwise be recycled actually does have a reuse purpose. So a lot of food pantries will actually use egg cartons. So people are really excited to bring us those items because they know it would otherwise just go in the trash. So we get a lot of those through the door, and those go down to Pilsen Food Pantry. So this is a social hall in the church, and we're very lucky that we also have access to this space as well as part of our arrangement here. And we use this space for pop-up volunteering events. So the space back there is obviously really, really small. So when we have a lot of work to do, we'll set up tables out here and bring our volunteers out here to sort items. But we also host distribution events here as well. We primarily don't do distribution ourselves, but one event that we love to do is a free teacher resource pop-up. So we accept office supplies and other items that would be useful to teachers here in Chicago. And every few months we do a pop-up where they can just come and take whatever they want for free.
The most intriguing aspect of the way these networks operate is that oftentimes a formal nonprofit sets up shop somewhere, whether it be a physical garden or a place to store resources, and then through back-channel mediums like text threads or other communication methods, they can then distribute to the informal distribution networks, which we can see highlighted on the map. While this isn't the case with all mutual aid networks, it is the case for Chicago Grows Food.
We are a collaborative nonprofit. So we are actively trying to reduce barriers to gardening as a way to fight food insecurity, improve mental and physical health, and ideally reduce the financial burden of the increasing cost of food. But on a bigger picture, as a collaborative, we're really a network of food justice organizations, universities, individuals, and gardening justice organizations trying to work together to find the gaps in the systems. So right now, that's really at an individual gardening level. For our home garden programs, we are directly connected with people at their homes. We are in their backyards. We are installing grow bags with soil and compost and seedling. And we are helping them, learn how to harvest and take care of their soil and water. We're answering questions. We're connecting with them on video. For our Grow Kit program, which is our it's a bigger operation, smaller kits. Those are primarily in partnership with schools, so less direct, but we work directly with the educators. So we really try and create flexible systems because we never want to tell the teachers what to do. We want to be able to support them if they have something that they need. A lot of teachers are already educating on climate change, on food security, on nutrition, on growing, on trees. And so we kind of just then give them the materials that make it more fun to learn. Some teachers don't know where to start or aren't as familiar, in which case we give them curriculum that they can use if they want, or lots of plans that they can adapt to their classrooms.
The formality of the way Chicago Grows Food is not how every network operates. Over in the more southern side of Chicago in Pilsen, the Burrito Brigade and Cycling X Solidarity have paired up as a network which makes and supplies burritos to houseless folks and also stocks and cleans the Love Fridges, who are also a nonprofit. The Burrito Brigade also operate under the 501c3 status, but operate much more like a collective. They also meet in a church basement, much like the Trash People, and distribute to informal networks like Cycling and Solidarity.
My name is Rick. My pronouns are he, him. My affiliations is I run the Cycling and Solidarity Instagram account. I volunteer with Bike Lane Uprising. I'm involved with Chicago Bike Grid Now and pretty much any other cycling organization in the city I work with. So I moved to Chicago about 2 weeks before lockdown in 2020. And so it was really difficult to get to know people. I didn't have any friends here. I loved riding my bike. It was great riding around the city with very little to no vehicular traffic. And so I would find myself constantly looking for events throughout the different social media platforms. And there wasn't one main calendar of people riding bikes or group rides. So I kind of selfishly created the Instagram page as a way for me to aggregate all the different cycling events in the city. It could be group rides, it could be events, it could be bike shop initiatives, it could be anything that revolves around cycling. And so I think more and more than ever, being divested from cars and using cars as a way to get around, both on the environmental aspect and then more grassroots in the community aspect. So I think we're more approachable. We're not getting out of a car. It really reduces the barriers. It's just a very pro-social way to engage folks. So that just kind of grew and grew into Burrito Brigade needs help with distributions. I can put it on my page. I could bring people together. We could do it via bike. And so it's just kind of organically grown into a community space where cycling is kind of at its core, right along with community. It's just going to be up to the people to connect with other people through organizations and just grassroots efforts to combat any of the negativity that we're going to be facing.
So we had an invitation from Rick and the Cycling X Solidarity gang to join them on a ride around the city passing out burritos to really get to know what their operation is and who exactly they're serving. Here we made a map of the path from the burrito making station to the meeting points, which is just one of the many which the Burrito Brigade delivers to. At a meeting point, a small plaza in Pilsen, we meet up with the Cycling X Solidarity gang and we went east into downtown area and Chinatown to pass out burritos. The main demographic this cycling group is meeting the needs of is the homeless community who typically live in encampments under the overpasses and in spots which are hard to reach by car. As we head deeper into the city, we can see the dynamics of inequality manifested in the design of the city, with the poorest living under the highways and the richest living in the high rises. Along the way, we met many different kinds of people who all one way or another took a burrito. Some ate theirs, others used it as hand warmers, others took 3 or 4 to meet the needs of others living in their tents with them.
My name is Nancy O'Donnell, and I live here in Beverly, and I've been retired for almost 20 years. And I think anyone who has a little extra time, whether they're retired or not retired, can do some community service. So this is called the Burrito Brigade, and we are making close to 500 burritos. We've already chopped all the kale, the onions, the carrots, the tomatoes, and they're all thrown in a pot that are cooked together with the beans and the rice and seasoning, and it's vegetarian. We will assemble the burritos and roll them in the big taco shell, and then we will roll it in a piece of aluminum foil that has a label on it. And the label has the ingredients and the date it was prepared. Some of the labels are in Spanish. So then all of those burritos wrapped up in aluminum foil, first of all, are counted, and then they are being distributed by some of the volunteers here and other volunteers that are throughout the community. Everybody should give back to their community. And it's a good way to meet other people in your community that are not of your age group or live on your block. I've been doing it for 2 years, and at first I invited my friend next door, and the next time I invited her, she didn't want to come, and the next time I invited her, she didn't want to come. So I came for about a year by myself, and I kept telling my husband, who has now been promoted to the cleanup committee, I kept telling him, you would like this. So now we come together.
There's a bunch of church ladies, I guess, on the south side who once a month make burritos to be given to hungry and needy people. And we're one of the stops here in Pilsen. We get a couple of hundred burritos, and then we, on our bicycles, distribute them.
Just to kind of give back to Chicago and that, Chicago's a great city and there's a lot of problems in that. And, if I can help alleviate them or try and fix them, I'm here to do it. I ride my bike all the time. I don't own a car in Chicago, and there's a lot of bike co-ops that I volunteer, help fix bikes, and this is kind of a natural progression to, help the homeless and that, and if you can do it without a car and help people who are less fortunate, it's a great thing to do.
No matter how bad a situation these people are in, they haven't lost their humanity. But these are people who very much need help and are very grateful for it, and there's just so much humanity there.
People are very, very grateful. We go to a lot of non-traditional places. We go to under viaducts, deep in the parks, places where cars can't go, where people, a lot of services do not get to, and we get there by bike, and, and we trudge into places that no one else goes. So that's very inspiring, and you get some very grateful thank yous, and people are like, I haven't eaten in 3-4 days, and no one comes by to see us. So if we're the one who can do it, it's really awesome.
we are delivering burritos to what looks like maybe a halfway house. And there's not a ton of people outside because it's pretty cold, but it is, one method is to have one person who might be out here and then they bring others out.
Hey, do you guys want a burrito? Yeah.
Did you guys make them?
Uh-huh, they're fresh. You guys want a burrito? You good? All right.
Functionally, these networks control their own means of producing goods, which then create more equitable ways of living. Whether it's making a nutritious burrito to then give to encampments under a bridge, or helping local neighbors build a garden to grow their own produce and then share amongst their neighbors. They are the ones reaping the benefits of their sweat and toil. No shareholders, no bottom line. There is a directness with localized mutual aid groups that requires things like accountability and fairness. When you have to come face to face with someone, live near them, and you both rely on each other for support, people are generally more discouraged from betraying their neighborhood's trust, especially when giving back to the place from which you came.
All state, what we do, my office primarily is definitely in, I would say, Black and Brown community, and it's not far from where I grew up, which was on purpose. I wanted to be there because we have a lot of immigrants, and especially just people who either moved here from wherever, especially Latin America, that have their kids here first generation. And so I have a lot of customers that come in needing things to get translated, different situations that arise with sometimes, let's say they have to do some work to their house and then a contractor doesn't finish the work, and then they'll come to us saying, I need help because I keep calling and they're not answering, and they already took my money because I thought that's what I was supposed to do, is give them the check that you gave me to for the work, and now they're not responding. So we get a lot of that stuff, or even car accident issues too, where they're like, what should I do? What are my rights? So it's a lot of advocacy for them in that aspect. There's so much, a multitude of things I can tell you. Like we do workshops for them to understand how the law works. If let's say one of them passes away, they don't know how the law is here. If, like in COVID, we had a lot of seniors pass away, and then their kids were, having to try to pay for the mortgage, and they just didn't know what are the steps. So it's just a lot of advocacy in that aspect of it. And then with Noble Neighbors, so we have a garden in the West Humboldt Park area, and we just try to bring in the community literally outside, because you see people's cars, but you don't see the people. And so we'll have a barbecue, we'll do a summer fest, we'll do an Easter hunt, we do a whole bunch of different things just to get kids out, because there's a lot of violence, whether it's gangs or gun shootings, drive-bys, which ironically, there was a lot of drug dealing back in the day. Like literally we would for spring cleaning for Earth Day, we still do it, but we don't see as many dime bags, but we used to see that. So it was like a lot of stuff. You had to be careful. We would have to wear gloves to make sure there wasn't needles. And it seems that also the people who, like, for example, there would be drug dealing right in the corner of like where the garden is, and they stopped positioning themselves there. So, there's a lot of good that comes from just showing that we're not here just one day to kind of, move or show a little bit of why, we're just doing something for publicity. We really do it because we want to be there and help the kids, especially their schools that literally they go to the school, but sometimes they're getting bused to school because they can't walk to school.
Mindy, a Chicago native, embodies these ideas of mutual aid perfectly. As an active citizen in Chicago, Mindy uses her skills in insurance to give back to the community from which she was born and raised directly. The act of caring for one another isn't a foreign concept. It isn't a new invention, and it isn't against human nature. Bringing together our collective resources, shared knowledge, and personal skills and experience is the key to fighting back against climate change and will continue to be. Communities have this amazing ability to mobilize together and produce real, tangible results. This is what humans do. We build, create, and grow, with the key being that we do it together.
I think that most of us, what we want is to be secure, that we're going to be able to feed our families and keep them cool enough to be safe in the summer and warm enough in the winter, have time to spend with each other. If we keep focused on those human priorities, we can live a sustainable life moving forward. I think that there's good practical stuff you can do, like eating less meat, which was a big adjustment for me. You know, my ancestors came to Chicago to eat meat all the time. But I think that we can accept that reducing meat consumption is an important action that we can take to lower our impact on the earth. And that as a daily practice, finding ways to nurture life and nurture community are also the key changes that working class people could make to help move towards a good future. I've worked in climate since 2015 to apply my core academic research. I think that when we're talking about climate change in the public, we're talking about changes in Earth systems, and we have to look at Earth as a mother, as a beloved relative. When we look at the changes that are happening to Earth systems, there is alarming, as if your grandma is hooked up to monitors in the hospital and she's had a stroke. People will say we don't need to take action until we've been at 1.5 for 5 years. No. If your grandma has a stroke, she needs help now. We need to change our behavior now. We need to show the earth love now by stepping back from greed and focusing more on our shared human values. I just want to say that Chicago, I'm rooting for you, and I'm rooting for working class Chicago. The news has not gotten out in the 1% about the disproportionately good outlook that we have in Chicago. So this is an important time for us to dig in now. Some people are going to be waiting until we get that first feet of sea level rise, and New York's subway system is full all the time, like it has been in all of those videos you've seen on TikTok after the rains. You all have seen it happening, and you all have seen the wildfires that are starting to sweep through LA right now. What you might know is that LA is projected to see substantial increases of days over 100 and over 105 every year by 2C. LA is going to be a place where social inequalities are much harder and more painful, and where you're seeing Phoenix-like heat in a city where the legacy architecture doesn't have air conditioning. Chicago's going to be a big deal. I'm rooting for Chicago, and it's time for us to make our grab now.
Chicago functionally is no different from New York or LA or Miami, or even Champaign. It's a city like any other city, but cities themselves as sites of political and economic change are special and worth learning about. Cities are spaces of concentrated labor, culture, and connected to one another and built environment. As global catastrophes ensue, cities are the main focal points for humans to organize and change their conditions through mass protest, organizing, campaigning, and mutual aid. We live in an age where the global stage is accessible to more than ever, and cities are sites of these exchanges. Chicago, as a space for labor organizing and mutual aid networks, is an important site to learn from.
One of the ways that through the city, when you partner with non-for-profits, they create these gardens that literally is a co-op, right? So it's shared for the community to come and grab whatever you want. Definitely, this is essential, but you know, pollution is in the city more than anywhere else, obviously, because there's more cars and factories and other stuff like that. So yeah, it's definitely prevalent. I like that the city does do a lot of funding for gardens, but there just needs to be more awareness, I think, about that. And then with in regards to my business with Allstate, it's definitely a struggle because cost of insurance keeps rising because of how global climate has showed. Just last year, we had 100 or 200 tornadoes in Illinois. And this is here, like basically in the city, you would say, right? So you hear tornadoes out in Plainfield and obviously more cornfield areas, but never in the city. So global climate has impacted greatly and unfortunately in different ways because that's creating the prices of everything to go up. I think in every aspect, no matter where you live, what you do, what you're eating, how you're going to work, whatever it is, you're getting impacted no matter what.
Mutual aid is resiliency. it's sustainability, it's community support, community identity even. It can be political, it can be sociological, it can even be biological if you really wanted to make that argument. But more than anything, mutual aid is direct. And direct support is exactly what we need when we're in the ring against global catastrophes like a recession, COVID, and climate change.
We want to fight it. We also know that it's not within our tiny organization's ability to do large-scale impact. So we really are trying to recognize how gardening and growing your own food has this bigger systemic impact, or hopefully the community ripple effect. And one of the things we've seen is that most of our participants are sharing their garden with family, with community, with neighbors. And we do get a lot of people coming to us year after year that are like, hey, my neighbor had your garden and was really happy with it. Can I get one this year? And that's what we want to be seeing. We want to be seeing these small neighborhood level groups coming together to really support each other and how we can help them support each other. The ultimate goal is to get anybody growing food that wants to grow food, right? We want to give people that ownership, that control, that food sovereignty that I think we are slowly moving away from, or have very quickly actually moved away from in the last 20, 30 years. So that's sort of our big picture. In the shorter term, we really would like to create more localized systems for crop sharing, for knowledge sharing. But also one thing that we realize or that we've seen is people when they're sick or when they go on vacation, the person taking care of their garden doesn't do it in a way that maximizes its yield. And, when you've worked hard on a garden, you want to make sure somebody else is taking care of it. So a part of our creating network is really to also support each other during those opportunities. We've even seen we work with a lot of older adults in their homes who, can maintain a garden but can't always get it set up. And so how do we, connect them with a neighbor that's, a little bit more fit to who can then help them set it up.
Awesome. And what are you doing here today, Isaac?
Well, we're making burritos.
Why are you making burritos?
Just to help people in need.
And what's important about that, Isaac?
Well, just to make sure that everybody feels, important and nobody is, left out, and just to make sure homeless people feel better about themselves and that people are looking over them.
Do you like helping people, Isaac?
Yes.
What's your favorite part?
My favorite part probably is seeing the people that we help to just make them feel better.
We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that. You're going to have to say that I am a proletariat. I am the people. I'm not the pig. You've got to make a distinction. And the people are going to have to attack the pigs. The people are going to have to stand up against the pigs. That's what the pastors are doing. That's what the pastors are doing all over.